Welcome et bienvenue. Mon nom est Charlène Marion, et de la part de WIL Canada, I am honored to open this inaugural event dedicated to highlighting and discussing important WIL issues in Canadian colleges and polytechnics. Before moving forward, I would like to encourage everyone to reflect on where you are joining us today. Knowing that we are all joining in from different places and spaces today, I would like to take the time to acknowledge the original owners, stewards, and caretakers of Turtle Island and the lands upon which we gather today. I am joining you from the unceded and stolen lands of the Abenaki peoples, part of the Wabanaki Confederacy, also known as Sherbrooke, Quebec. Acknowledging the stolen land that we are on is critical to grounding ourselves in these discussions around equity, diversity, and inclusion, as it is important to remind ourselves of the extensive history of inequalities and injustices that are represented by the very land that supports the work-integrated learning experiences we all work to facilitate. I would like to encourage everyone present to take a moment to introduce themselves in the chat, as well as share a land acknowledgement if you wish. Wow. WIL Canada's first edition of Inspiring WIL in Canadian colleges and polytechnics has been an idea brewing for quite some time. And to be here in front of so many of you today, I'm truly excited to see this come to fruition. Today, we bring together thought leaders, WIL professionals, government champions, and researchers, all in the name of highlighting the amazing work at colleges and polytechnics in Canada. The world is rapidly transforming, as our labor market needs, and this calls for the ability to adjust to those changes, something that colleges and polytechnics have been doing for decades. Work-integrated learning has been and continues to be integral to the learning experience at your institutions, and I'm excited to share in these memorable discussions today. A few housekeeping items, of course. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you will find the following useful functionalities: a chat button. So this is where you can chat with each other during today's symposium, share thoughts and ideas as well. A Q&A button. This is where you can submit your questions to the presenters. Our moderators will read them out during the Q&A portions of the program. If you encounter technical difficulties, the best option is to always leave the meeting and re-enter. And if it continues, you can always email events@cwilcanada.ca. A small note that we also plan for a short 10-minute bio break after the first hour and 20 minutes. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to recognize the faces behind this event today. A special thank you to my colleagues at Redstone Agency who are working the Zoom behind the scenes, to Sean Elliott, to Dario Gassini, Heather Workman, Tony Slade, and Matt Rempel for their time, energy, and support. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first session, moderated by WIL's own president, Dr. Matthew Rempel. Matt became president of WIL back in November of 2021 after being a WIL member since 2018. Matt has also held the position of EWO president in Ontario. In real life, Matt is the director of career integrated learning at Sheridan College that oversees WIL and cooperative education opportunities for students across many disciplines. I'm thrilled to start today's events with an engaging panel discussion. Over to you, Matt.
Okay, thank you so much, Charlene. And hello, bonjour to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to be sharing the next hour with you and this incredible panel of thought leaders. You know, there's so much going on in our lives, both globally and close to home these days. And whether it's pandemic related, the price of gas or the economy, or global conflicts that may be impacting our friends and family, it can sometimes feel a little bit strange being excited about something. But for the next little while, I just want to encourage you all to be in the moment with us. It's National Co-op and Work Integrated Learning Month, and we're here to talk about the future of WIL. So yes, there are some obstacles that we're going to discuss along the way, but also we're going to have a chance to consider and think about the vast opportunities in front of us here in Canada. So for me, that's exciting. Not only as your president of WIL, but I work at Sheridan and I'm a member of our college and polytechnic community. So the two things I love, Canadian colleges and polytechnics and work integrated learning, coming together on this national stage is just fantastic. For many of us who work in this space, we see the incredible impact WIL has on students, on employers, on community partners and institutions. It's inspiring. It's the theme of this month, Inspired WIL, and it motivates us daily to ensure that Canada's WIL thrives and continues to innovate, to evolve, and to lead on a global stage. So for today's thought leadership panel, I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists, but I've asked each of them to share a bit more about themselves, their organization or institution, and just the context of WIL for you. And while I have probably more questions than I can shake a stick at to ask this panel, I'm going to do my best to ensure we touch on a range of critical and timely topics that are related to work integrated learning in Canada, and of course, focusing on the college and polytechnics perspective. Similar to what Charlene said, the CWIL team will be monitoring questions that you may have from our viewers. I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on the chat log and ensure that we can create a conversation and or answer some questions near the end of the panel session. So to do that, you just need to go to the bottom of the Zoom tab here where it says Q&A, and that's the place where you can put your questions, and the moderators will take a look at that and respond accordingly. Okay, so with all of that being covered, I'm thrilled to introduce our panel. I'll start off with Denise Amiat. Denise was appointed in 2013 as the President and CEO of Colleges and Institutes Canada, the voice of Canada's colleges, institutes, CEGEPs, and Polytechnics, has been an international leader in education for employment in over 25 countries. Denise, we are so pleased to have you join us, and we really look forward to hearing your perspective. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Joe Baker. Joe is a passionate leader within Canada's tourism, hospitality, and education sectors, and a vocal advocate for resilient, inclusive, future-forward industry. He's the CEO of Joe Baker & Co., human capital consultancy, and currently working with Tourism HR Canada on their student work placement program, Propel. Welcome, Joe. I'm also very thrilled that Elizabeth Kidd is here with us today. Liz was appointed the President and Chief Executive Officer of College of the North Atlantic in June of 2020, and had previously served as their Vice President, Corporate Services, and Chief Operating Officer before that. Prior to coming to the College of the North Atlantic, she held various leadership positions with College Boreal in Ontario, and we're so happy you're here with us today. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Sarah Watts-Reinhard. Sarah assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer at Polytechnics Canada in July of 2018. Prior to this role, she served as Executive Director of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. She's also the Vice Chair of the Canadian Centre for Women in Science, Engineering, Trades and Technology, as well as Vice Chair of the CWB Welding Foundation. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your time with us today. So I think it's super clear for all of us. We have an amazing panel of leaders here, and my introductions in no way can possibly describe the wealth and experience and the leadership we have in front of us right now. So probably the better thing to do is to dive right in and start our panel discussion. Okay, so I had asked each panelist to provide a bit of an introduction to yourselves and your relationship with WIL. And given that it's National Co-op and WIL Month, just from your perspective, what's working? What inspires you about WIL? What opportunities you see in front of us right now? Now, before we got started, I had a chance to talk to the panelists, and I asked who wanted to go first, and it was crickets, so I get to roll the dice and pick in the moment. So I hope that you are as enthralled as I am right now. I'm going to start with you, Sarah, though.
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, as you said, I'm the CEO at Polytechnics Canada, and we're an association of 13 polytechnic institutions across Canada. I'd say one of the ways that when we think polytechnic, one of the ways we define that is really the hands-on, applied, industry-aligned nature of the training and education that students are able to get at a polytechnic. And so when I think about that, I think about, regardless of the program, the sector, the occupation, whether it's in healthcare, technology, cybersecurity, skilled trades, environmental programs, we're really seeing work integrated learning embedded there. And that's about helping students make smooth school to work transitions, but also pulling from the breadth of WIL approaches that really make those opportunities dynamic and responsive. So whether that's a clinical placement or a practicum, co-op placement, applied research, apprenticeship, really see across that whole spectrum of WIL. And I think, a lot of my comments today will really speak to that as I think being a superior value proposition of work integrated learning within the Polytechnic and college sector. So, from our perspective, I mean, what we try and do at Polytechnics Canada is focus on that breadth of approaches and the practical implications of work integrated learning for students and graduates, but also for business partners and employers. And our focus has been trying to really make that real for the funders, for government, so that they understand where those investments are really where the rubber hits the road and where there's real value there. So when I think about a couple of things, what's working, there are funds available that really let us push the envelope of something that the sector has done for a really long time, but experiment with new and innovative ways and really provide promoting work integrated learning to a wider range of employers. When I think about what's inspiring me, I am amazed by what institutions have been able to do during the pandemic, whether that was virtual WIL placements or expanding to international partnerships, by becoming the employer themselves and launching new partnerships. I just think that it's really, it's quite inspiring to see that transition take place. And then it's really clear that, work integrated learning is allowing institutions not only to give their students the tools to do their job and be successful in their future career, but let them try them on for size. And how do you use those tools, and what does that look like in the workplace? So I think that that's what really helps people develop the competency and the confidence that they need to be successful in their future careers, opportunities. I'd like to see the expansion of paid placements into areas even where work integrated learning has traditionally been delivered as unpaid, and obviously find new ways to deliver work integrated learning placements to international students, some of whom face some additional barriers. And I know those are some of the topics that we'll be talking about. So I won't go into that too much now, but thanks very much for inviting me to be here. I'm glad to be part of this panel.
Oh, thanks so much, Sarah. So many nuggets there that would be exciting to expand upon. And I think it's not lost on the community of viewers in our audience here that the last couple of years during a global pandemic has been tough on work integrated learning, at the exact same time where there's been unprecedented investment in work integrated learning at all levels of government. So a weird dichotomy to be living through, but it has certainly inspired all of us that are practitioners to innovate in ways we didn't think were possible and think in different ways. So we'll explore that in a wee bit, I have no doubt. Joe, may I ask you to go next?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. Joe Baker here. I'm going to start with my origin story because I think it's relevant when we're talking about how WIL impacts individuals and how it shapes careers. I was born and raised in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, and brought right into Canada's hospitality and tourism industry. My family owned restaurants and hotels out on the West Coast for a very long time. Traveled a lot as a young person and inevitably kind of ended up in Toronto, which is where I'm calling from today. And I went to school. I studied at Ryerson. It was Ryerson Polytechnic University at the time. I studied hospitality and tourism management. And why that mattered to me was in the final year of my program, I got the opportunity to do a work integrated learning placement, although I don't think that we were using the terminology work integrated learning yet by then. But I did my placement at the in-room dining department of the Royal York Hotel. And so if you're a hospitality and tourism practitioner, that is geek out central. That hotel is really a cultural icon for this country. And that work integrated learning experience really informed a lot of the rest of my career. And in fact, I mention it because while I was doing a placement there, I was referred through a networking process to somebody who was a very senior person at a restaurant company called The Keg. So when I graduated university, I started right away in a management job. Yes, I was one of those unreasonable students that wasn't willing to settle for anything less than exactly what I expected in my career. So I got to manage restaurants immediately after graduation. I worked for companies like The Keg and Oliver and Bonacini Hospitality. And as I continued to develop throughout my career, I got that little, that voice in the back of your head, or it was actually a feeling in my heart that what I really enjoyed about my career was actually leadership development, training, education. And so once again, I somehow managed to talk my way into getting a job at George Brown College. And spent 8 incredible years there at their Center for Hospitality and Culinary Arts. My final position there was running their field placement department. So it's a pretty amazing full cycle story. After leaving George Brown College, I went to Centennial College as the Dean of the School of Hospitality and Tourism and Culinary Arts. Got the opportunity to design both programs and a beautiful 350,000 square foot mixed use residence academic space that included the entire school, which has a restaurant, a cafe, an event space, culinary labs, bake labs, and wouldn't you know it, obviously why I'm sitting here, completely integrated into the experiential learning and work integrated learning ecosystem. I have since left the post-secondary sector. Matt kind of referenced, this has been a very challenging year for a number of industries. But for me, watching Canada's hospitality and tourism industry absolutely fall apart due to no fault of their own as an extension of this pandemic was really heartbreaking. And so I decided that I would take a break from my higher education career pursuits and get more back into the core essence of what I love, which is training, development, and now working with organizations, including Tourism HR Canada. Had the privilege of putting together for the first time a successful bid for a hospitality and tourism focused student work placement program called Propel, and then had the opportunity to work with WIL and continue, actually spend lots of time with my colleagues at George Brown College to really make this a meaningful partnership. So that's my origin story. And there's lots of interaction between industry and education, and industry again, and education again. And in a nutshell, that's what I think the strength is of work integrated learning right now. It is an understandable, digestible, accessible platform that connects the education system with industries, that helps those students transition from learners to future leaders. And I'm optimistic that collectively we can continue to propose some solutions that help everybody get back to thriving over the next couple of years. An honor to be here today and to join and to share perspective, especially on behalf of Tourism HR Canada, Canada's national workforce development organization specifically focused on the hospitality and tourism industry. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any origin story that involves Geek Out Central is a good one in my mind. And for those of us that are practitioners in work integrated learning, like this is the stuff that gets us out of bed and makes us motivated to go to work, because so many of our grads or our colleagues have some similar life-changing moment through work integrated learning that's sort of set the path for their future. And for us, that's the motivation that drives us every day. We love it. Thank you so much, Joe. Denise, may I go to you next, please?
Absolutely. I think I'll share a story also. I'm inspired by what Joe said. I studied in biology, and my first internship was to work in a laboratory. And that's what motivated me, in fact, to finish my degree, but not stay in biology. So the reasons why I share this is because I realized that to work in a lab all day was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life because I like people too much. And so I went to education. So this is my story about work integrated learning. But I want to start by talking about the map behind me. You probably have recognized the map of Canada, and you may wonder what are all those little dots. There are 686 of them. It's all geolocated. In fact, they are the campuses of our members. So they are literally everywhere. And as Matt mentioned, I represent, all the colleges, the Polytechnics, the Cégep, and the institutes across the country. And we also have Indigenous institutions that are our members, as well as French minority language members or English language minority. And I want to say that we have been a close partner to WIL for a long time. We've shared some of the same advocacy, in fact, priorities. And in the last 2 years, we've been working, in fact, closer together because of the needs for more WIL. And we've met regularly along with a group of other national PSC stakeholders, including CASA, NEEDS, Polytechnics Canada. And we always talked about the need for more WIL opportunities. And we talked about opening the federal WIL internships to international students, but also to our own members, that in light of the fact that during the pandemic, we know that it was harder to find a WIL. So Sarah already talked about the importance of WIL for our system. In fact, colleges and institutes have a long-standing history of providing WIL to students. It had various names during the years: co-ops, internships, field placements, clinical placement, and even applied research. And the reasons for all that is because it's the foundations of college and institute learning. Why? Because it helps people build the employment-focused skills they need to thrive immediately in the workforce. But I talk to people that know about that. And this is, we believe, why our graduates are so well appreciated by the employers. The level of satisfaction, in fact, is 93%, because our graduates can hit the ground running. And I mentioned applied research earlier because it is often not thought of. And in fact, in the year 2020, we had over 42,000 students that were able to participate in applied research activities to gain very valuable WIL experience. And this represented, and it's important to know about that, 45% increase over 2 years. So it shows you the importance of WIL. And I'm pleased to say that in our associations, we've been administrating 4 career launcher programs where we've placed students and graduates in paid internships to acquire experience in demand sectors such as clean tech, digital tech, natural resources, or even advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And just since 2015, we've been able to place 2,500 of those. And in many cases, we did a study on those people. They either continued and went to pursue studies, or they were recruited by the employer where they started their WIL. And what's exciting about WIL, so I'll be quick on this one. We all know that during the pandemic, it was hard. In fact, 1/3 of all participants reported that the pandemic resulted in the cancellations or postponement of their WIL opportunity. And of course, we couldn't just sit. And we thought there must be something we could do. And we began to talk with some of our members that were experimenting with virtual reality or augmented reality. And then we began to dream. And we thought, what if, considering that it's so difficult to get some WIL in some fields, we would experiment with virtual simulations to enhance learning. So we canvassed members, we asked them where was there the most need. They said to us, laboratory technicians, for obvious reasons, nursing and paramedics. So we approached the government and we convinced them to do a pilot project with the post-secondary sector to develop those virtual simulations. And in fact, and this included colleges, polytechnics, and universities. And I'm pleased to report that we had over 37 post-secondary institutions that worked together to develop over 120 virtual simulations in the 3 fields. So, and this is very cool because we think that this is part of the future. It does not replace to do WIL in person. Absolutely not. But we think that it is part of the brochette of tools that is necessary to have work integrated learning experience. And what we hope now is to increase those WIL opportunities to other sectors. So the last thing I'll say, I see a need for more flexibility for WIL program that should not necessarily just be done by semester. If we look at the apprentice, they can, work and at the same time have a study. So I think it's part of the future where we would have students that could, in fact, do that. We know it's happening in some sectors. We know in Quebec, it's quite, it's really starting to happen. Ils appellent ça les programmes travail-études, but I think it's part of the future.
Wow. Thank you for that. And I do echo, CWIL has had a fantastic working relationship with you, Denise, and CICAN. We really appreciate it. We have a lot of shared values and advocacy work together. And hey, the video gaming nerd in me loves the idea of VR and WIL together. Like, you can't ask for more. So super cool. Thank you for that. And Liz, could I ask you as well?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. And it's a hard group to follow. Lots has already been said. But my name's Liz Kidd, president of College of the North Atlantic out here in Newfoundland and Labrador. A small province, but a large province nonetheless. We have 17 campuses across a vast territory with approximately 500,000 people that live here. So some people think we're not quite even the size of Mississauga in Ontario, but we have a lot of land to cover. So it makes WIL challenges even more difficult. Here at the college, we have approximately 7,000 part-time and full-time students, approximately 104 programs. Of those 104 programs, 93% of them today offer a WIL component in it. We completely believe, and I completely believe, that WIL needs to be, it's the success of the student. Without WIL, I don't think students can be successful or as successful, because as Denise pointed out earlier, and Joe as well, it's you get a taste for what you're doing. Some people will like it and some people may not, right? And I think that's very important. I also think we're in a different age. We're in an age where students, it's not the age when I went to school, or sorry, Denise, I'll throw you under the bus as well, but, or Denise went to school. I mean, everybody here, I think, can say that students today are very, very different. And I own 2 of those students. I have 2 children who are doing a nautical science. My son's finished a nautical science degree with an emphasis on a focus on engineering technology. And both of them are in applied degree programs. Why? Because they want to touch. They want to feel what it's like to be out there. They want to problem solve. And I think these facets are huge, because what the students are learning on a WIL placement, or whether they were doing an applied research project or a capstone project or whatever that WIL component is, they're learning problem solving skills. They're learning skills that you just cannot learn from a textbook. And we can all be textbook smart, but we actually need to be, to others' points, you need to be able to hit the ground running with the employer. And that's what colleges are able to do. We're able to produce the student that is able to hit the ground running when they get to the employer, because they have problem solving skills. We've talked sort of about the negative aspects of the pandemic, and yes, agreed, there have been negative aspects in terms of the WIL and getting our students out the door. But we actually had some really big success stories come out of the WIL. So our nursing students, or our LPN students here in Newfoundland, were in such high demand when they got into the whether they were in long-term care homes or in hospitals. They were put to the test in situations that in a normal year they would have never have seen. Their problem solving skills, they were put through the ringer, if you will, and they got an experience that you could not pay for. I mean, these experiences were life learnings to them. Some of them didn't, some of them excelled, and then some of them decided that maybe that wasn't the career choice for them. But the point is that they had this incredible experience that was offered to them by an occasion. We also had great experiences with students from the perspective of students with disabilities. When we went on to a remote platform and remote WIL, they shone, because they were able easily to hook up to their computers. They were easily able to interact. It was a huge opportunity for students with disabilities, and we saw that at the college as well. And I know that we're going to get into some of these questions, but I think these are the opportunities. I have, significant opinions as to why universities and colleges are vastly different in this, and why we succeed. Lots of chat around that, and I'm more than happy to have those discussions in a bit. But excited to be here today, especially because I can bring that direct student impact. Thanks so much.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And teeing us up right into the next line of question, right? So we've had this exceptional perspective. We have two national associations representing education. We have an industry national association and a leader of an institution all here. And you spoke to students with disabilities and accommodation. And that kind of leads us to the first question that I had here. Now, one of the worst parts about being a monitor or moderator is I have to watch the time. So friends, I don't think I'll be able to hear an answer out of everyone for each of these questions coming up. So if you want to pick and choose which ones you're keen to participate in, take a quick glance at the questions and maybe one or two responses per question to keep us honest to the timelines. I would love to talk to you longer, I really would, but we're going to have to try to do that. So the question then is just around equity, diversity, inclusion. This is as critical a topic as could be for all of us. And we are aware that there's also the potential for systemic and behavioral barriers that are excluding our students from participating in or being successful in WIL. So, given that, what is the opportunity here? Or what are some of the issues that colleges and polytechnics could be involved in to enable inclusive and accessible WIL? And then alternatively, where is industry in this, and how can industry support and enable inclusive and accessible work integrated learning?
So I can take it if you want.
Please do.
Okay, so I talked to you about the map earlier. This map, it's all geolocated. You can find it on our website. And if you look for what are the colleges in your neighborhood, you just enter your postal code and they will appear immediately. What I did not say though, is because it's all geolocated, we can now say that 95% of all Canadians live within 50 kilometers of a college or an institute location, and 86% Indigenous people also live within 50 kilometers of a college or an institute location. So this brings me to talk about Indigenous students. There's a reasons why the number of Indigenous students is the same percentage of graduates that have a diploma as non-Indigenous in this country. And in the trades, it is 1% more Indigenous. So, and this is all because of access point to post-secondary education for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis learners. And because our members are also deeply engaged in advancing reconciliation and empowering communities. And one of the prime examples of them doing that is that there are over 300 credential programs tailored to the needs of Indigenous learners and communities. And again, like Elizabeth mentioned earlier, with respect to the high percentage of programs that have a WIL component, it is in the 90% plus. So it means that those students have access also to WIL opportunities, sometimes on reserve, sometimes outside the reserve with the industry and so on. And because this week was International Women's Day, I cannot talk about gender. I have to talk about gender. And because, as you know, there are also women living in remote communities. And for them, we know now, because Stats Canada just issued a report, that they are key to post-secondary education and attainment. In fact, they said that in more remote communities, there are more women that turn to colleges and institutes rather than universities or trade schools for post-secondary education. And this accessibility is the key supporting women's education and empowerment. And when we say that, it includes the WIL component as well. And this brings me also to the career launcher that I've mentioned. 50% of the students that were placed, we encourage employers to recruit people that were from youth at risk, or that were from minorities groups or persons with disabilities. And the incentive was to provide them better wage subsidies in those cases. And we have issued, and I could send it to you, Matt, later, and you could share it with the audience, but we produced a guide for the career launcher employers, all about diversity and with tips for inclusive recruitment, inclusive selections process, and having tools and resources, and how to ensure inclusions in the workplace. So I thought I would mention those things, because at the end of the day, it's not only for the colleges and institutes and polytechnics to be to work on inclusions, but also for the employers, they must be proactive, and they must make efforts to eliminate barriers or obstacles that prevent accessibility.
Oh, that's amazing. I see some comments from our audience that are in agreement with you, Denise. Liz, you're so polite. You have your hand up. Let's go to you next, and then I think we're going to need to switch to the next question in the interest of time. Please.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Matt. And Denise, I just wanted to sort of elaborate on one of the points that you made, and it was towards the end. When it comes to the employers, we have a duty to educate. We need to educate employers on how to create inclusive and accessible environments. I attended a training session actually on Monday, and it was a training session on autism. And just taking that area of inclusion, we have to create an understanding with employers of neurodiversity. So there's a lot of things playing here, because I learned stuff in that session that I didn't know. And I'm, theoretically, College of North Atlantic is as much of an employer as anybody else. So we need to actually go out there and educate our employers about diversity and inclusion, because we're all using this terminology of EDI. I'm not sure if we actually understand it right down to the root of what it means, because you must provide tools to the employers in order to know what to do. Because it's not easy. If you've got an autistic student that's coming in there on a WIL placement, they need to have tools in order to address and understand the needs of that person and how to interact with them.
And if I may, Matt, I'll just add one thing that I didn't mention. We received funding recently from ICED, because we were one of the early signatory of the Challenge 5030 on diversity, inclusions, and equity. And they provided us funding, in fact, to do exactly what Elizabeth has mentioned. Because we told them how close we were with the business sector and the industry across the country. And we will be developing tools, in fact, with the colleges and institutes for the employers and for the business sector. So stay tuned.
Amazing. In a similar kind of topic line, I'd like to ask Sarah, if you'd be so kind, just related to international students. I think it's safe to say we've seen nothing short of radical growth in the number of international students that are studying in Canadian post-secondary institutions. And for international students specifically, WIL has immense and obvious benefit for students that might be choosing to stay and become Canadian citizens as well. So I just wanted to get your perspective on international students in work integrated learning. What's going on? What are some of the issues? And what do you think some of the opportunities are in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think that it is really interesting to see, tremendous growth. And, we know that more and more skill shortages are coming up as being sort of the emerging challenge in the post-pandemic world, and government's talking about immigration. It makes so much sense to transition international students into immigration pathways, and certainly I know that CICAN and Polytechnics Canada and others have been really kind of active in those conversations in that space. But it's interesting, the international students would do so much better in that space with real opportunities to be able to put their education to work through work integrated learning. And I know that institutions are pushing that forward and really looking for those opportunities. But when we look at something like the student work placement program that Joe mentioned, it really is focused still on domestic students. And so I think that we do have a bit of an opportunity to be able to recognize that is going to become a bigger and bigger barrier, and frankly undermines a broader government objective around really bringing in immigrants to solve some of our skill shortages. And recognizing that new immigrants take a while to integrate into the labor market in the places where they should be. And I'd say that's a bit of an opportunity. It's like, use the schools that are bringing in these international students in increasing numbers to make sure that the connections with the labor market are being made. And so, I think it's a big task for groups like WIL, like CICAN, like Polytechnics Canada to keep on pushing and saying it just doesn't make sense to put barriers up around the inclusion of international students in some of those programs that, frankly, we really do need to make those connections if we want to have a smooth transition into the labor market for those students.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Anyone who's involved in facilitating work integrated learning knows what it feels like to describe the funding programs to an employer. Where one student's funded and another isn't. We know what's going to take place in those moments, and it's not necessarily our desired outcome, obviously. So Thank you for that, Sarah. Colleagues, in the interest of time, there's a couple other questions we might want to get to, but I saw Liz, you beat Joe to the punch, but Joe, I'll ask you a question right next, I promise. Did you have a follow-up, Liz, on international students? A quick one?
Yeah, so one of the aspects I think that also has to be talked about is the actual benefit to the employers and to communities, because this is about growing our immigrant population at the same time. I mean, coming from a province that is underpopulated and is in a dire need of an increase in population, it's extremely important. And I'm just going to give one example, and very quickly. We had the Jamaican government approach College of the North Atlantic a few years ago, and they wanted us to offer a heavy duty mechanic program to students coming from Jamaica. So we brought in 19 students from Jamaica. At the end of the day, they all went on to their work placements. 15 of those stayed on study permits afterwards here in Newfoundland. Out of those 15, 7 became permanent residents. What happened only is that one of the employers who was participating in the WIL program with us, he sponsored the student's entire family to come over to Newfoundland and Labrador. This WIL has impacts that are far greater than just the student, and the impacts on the community and on the families. When we're talking about the international piece and immigrating to Canada, to me is a very significant piece. And it also, to Sarah's point, it also helps with filling the gaps in the skills that we need.
For me, Liz, those are my most favorite. It makes good economic sense for a country, but it also tugs on the feel-good strings in our hearts. That's the magic. That's where it happens. Joe, can I switch you over to maybe a labor market trends question, and feel free to weave in anything around international students that you'd like. But we know the labor market, it's changing, it's evolving. The economy is still trying to emerge from the impacts of a lot, including a pandemic. And we hear everything from skill shortages to skills gaps to a changing work-life expectations of people who are working, and particularly having seen some success with virtual and remote work options. So what are you seeing here from the industry perspective, and where does WIL fit into the evolving labor market from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And, for most people on this call, we have an understanding of the student work placement program. I talked about it, and I'm specifically representing Tourism HR Canada, but of course, that's only one of the various industry organizations who have successfully secured some of the funding Denise referred to really help bridge their academic institutions into their specific industries. So, it's a very privileged position to be here and kind of speaking on behalf of one of those organizations, but also collectively, on behalf of many of the industry groups who have come together through work integrated learning to really try to make this connection. And my last point on the last point to what Liz was saying, just as we need to rely on the education institutions to help in the advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion within industry, we also need to rely on them to help the government learn about the value of international students far beyond the scope that they've already managed to wrap their heads around. And I know that getting people to learn up is much more challenging. So just to commend Denise and WIL and Polytechnics Canada, all of these incredible advocacy groups. There has never been a more vital time for us to come together with unified voices and speaking to our governments and saying, look, we are finally at the table together. Whether it took a disaster of a pandemic or whatever, here we are. These are the needs of our education system. These are the needs of our industry. These are the needs of our immigrant populations, our Indigenous populations, and our international students, and let's move forward together. And that sometimes can get lost and sound like fluffy language, but collaboration over competition, communication over conflicts and challenges. And I think that that's really key and essential. I use the hospitality and tourism industry as a micro case study for something that is much, much larger. The tourism industry collectively pre-pandemic employed nearly 2 million Canadians. Why does that matter? That matters because that represents about 1 in 10 working people in this country were employed in the tourism sector. At the same time, that sector experienced devastation coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. We also recognize that so did the academic institutions that were serving that sector. Enrollment declines. The capacity for industry organizations, small to medium enterprises, to even think about bringing post-secondary students into their environments for work integrated learning when all they were thinking about is their own survival. This has been a very, very challenging time for many industries, and this is not specifically about the tourism industry. We are a little bit lagging behind in terms of recovery. We are certainly wrestling with our own workforce issues. And all I can say is, having spent time, I do consider myself a dual professional, a hospitality and tourism industry practitioner, and a higher education leader, regardless of where I am or where I'm working. These are things that are important to me. I recognize the challenge that so many of you who work in the sector are facing. There are internal driving forces that can sometimes make it feel like your work is being pulled away from that connection with industry, especially as more of the colleges have the drive to, focus more on research and focus more on degrees and all of the pieces, and the Polytechnic institutes as they reach to become universities, regardless of how beautifully our higher education system advances and develops. And yes, we want that. And yes, I am a big supporter of that. Do not lose that bridge, that connection with the fact that what you do within these higher education institutions impacts your students, it impacts your communities, it impacts your economies, it impacts this country, and now, thanks to the advance in international education, it impacts the world. And you don't need to look very far to see how important it is for Canada to play a very strong role in the global labor markets as values start to maybe come into question around the world. And higher education institutions are a hub of culture, the place where we get to teach people from all around the world to think for themselves, to determine what's important to them, to learn how to socially interact with people from all around the world. And all of those things are so hard to quantify when you're trying to achieve metrics that are determined by a balanced scorecard or that are determined by your performance review. And all I would say is, this is not a trade-off. It's not choosing one over the other. It's not saying one is better than the other. It's saying that a true integrative thinker understands that it's the conflict between pure academics and pure industry that can lead to something even better than just one, better than just the other, the benefit of both. And work integrated learning plays an integral role in connecting the higher education system with Canada's economy, Canada's community, Canada's cultures. So here we are facing this incredible time in our history where we have been absolutely disrupted. So many people thought we were all going to be disrupted by technology. Turns out we all got disrupted by biology. Be adaptable, be nimble, lead through values, and continue to remember that higher education and industry need to work together for the advancement of this country and for our priorities around the world.
Matt, if I may, I want to piggyback on something that Joe said, but very, very quickly. And it's linked to labor market trends and WIL. One of the issues that we haven't mentioned yet is that many of the programs of WIL have an age limit. We are in a world where we keep talking about lifelong learning and about, helping people to transition to new role, new job. The average age of our students is 27. But why are there so many internships program or WIL opportunities that have a cap on age? When you know that where there has been the highest enrollment in the last 2 years has been in the 35-44 category. So it means that none of those learners would have access to the WIL opportunities, except with MyTax, because I don't think MyTax has an age limit. But something is wrong with that, and we need to raise this with governments, whether at the federal or provincial or territorial level, and to ensure that there's no age limit.
Amazing. Here's the good news for us all. The producers have spoken to me and they say that there's just so much demand for the four of you that we're going to stick around for an extra 15 minutes so we can cover a little bit more ground, which is fabulous. So thank you so much. Might switch gears here a little bit. Liz, I felt passion in your voice around the role of colleges and polytechnics, maybe in comparison or contrast with our university counterparts. And applied learning, this has been our wheelhouse in colleges and polytechnics since, dirt was young. So if that's a differentiating factor for us, and we're now moving into a model where universities are playing a lot more in the WIL sandbox, what are your thoughts on where we need to be to continue leading in this space? And how do we make sure that we stay ahead of the supply demand curve for WIL?
Well, I'm obviously extremely biased. I think colleges and polytechnics rule the sandbox when it comes to WIL, and I think the key here, egos aside, is really around the fact that we've been doing applied experiential learning since our beginning. We have it entrenched in our blood. That's what we do in colleges and polytechnics, and that's what we've been doing forever. So we don't have a lot of the academia side that surrounds a university and the requirements for that. We actually get down to grassroots learnings, and I think that whole piece around applied experiential learning is critical. Again, learners today are not the same as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. They have changed so much. They are constantly on their video. You admitted it before, Matt, video geek. They're on video games. They're always touching. They have attention spans that we think they're not paying attention to us, but they're actually paying attention to 12 things happening all at the same time. They don't learn chalk and talk. They want to touch, they want to build, they want to feel, they want to understand the process that they're going through. And I think that's where we're different than universities, because we've been doing this for so long. How do we continue? We must incorporate and continue to incorporate experiential learning and WIL in every single one of the aspects that we do. But we also have to work with industry. We have to continue to work with industry to understand what they need from their workforce, so that we are enabled to prepare, that we're able to prepare our students to go out and become, to Joe's point earlier, the future leaders of their organizations. And it's only through understanding what the needs of industry are that we're going to actually be able to do that. I also think that, I spoke to an engineer. I had lunch with an engineer last week. He's a university graduate. He's in a co-op program. He was in a co-op program. He said the only time he actually learned anything was when he actually went out to the workforce. The 5 years that he was in school, 4 of which he said were almost useless. And the 1 year that he's actually doing his co-op, if you added up the 4 terms, the 1 year that he's actually doing his co-op placements, that's where he actually learned something. So that says a lot. And I think the experiential learning that we do in our classrooms, because our classrooms are WIL on, steroids, if you want. They're actually touching in the classrooms. You bring that into, the workforce, they're able to transition those skill sets quite easily.
I would actually, sorry, Denise. I guess I would just really underline 2 things that Liz has said that I think is really important. The first being the breadth of opportunity is a real differentiator. I mean, that idea of experiential learning that's actually happening in the classroom, and then that decision about what are the right WIL opportunities, and like fitting that to the program and the sector, and the sort of figuring out the right recipe to make that transition as smooth as possible. And I think the other sort of piece there is that continuous feedback loop. How do we know that this works? Because you have to keep asking. You have to say, how could we better have prepared the students that we were sending to you? And what really worked, what really didn't work, and keep on tweaking the recipe because the workplace is changing. It's changing faster than than universities can keep up, and it's getting, I think, harder and harder for any institution to kind of keep their programs and keep their responses to be really cutting edge, right on the edge there. So as I totally agree, it's built into the DNA of the Polytechnic College sector. I was like, there's no question to me that the leadership is there. Now it becomes the continual feedback loop and that sort of constant ability to tweak the recipe, so that those things never lose the way that they're relevant and the way they resonate with the employer community.
And for me, I don't want people to think that one system is better than the others. We're really complementary, the colleges, polytechnics, and the universities. That's why also we have so many university students in our institutions now, because we send students to universities, and universities literally send students to us as well. And I think one of the attractiveness of colleges is the access. And when I say access, I mean in terms of locations. It doesn't matter where you are across the country, whether it's rural, isolated, northern, urban. But it's also that there's no door that is locked. There's always a door for you in a college. If you don't have your basic foundations, there will be a door for you because you will be able to get it. And also the fact that we can do prior learning assessment recognition is a big plus for the learners that we have, instead of redoing everything just because they don't have the paper. If they have the competencies and it is assessed that they have the competencies, then they will just need to complete what they have to do. And I want to go back to the fact that the reasons why our graduates have such a high rate of placement. In fact, it's 93% average across the country. And employer satisfactions, 95% of employer satisfactions with our graduates. It's for all the reasons that Sarah and Liz has mentioned. And it's also because of the programs. We have 10,000 across the country. Each of those 10,000 have a program advisory committee that is made up from people from the industry. And they are the one that provide advice on the curriculum, on the equipment, on the competencies, on the internships, the WIL, as well as on labor market information. So, and that's why there's in the programs, they keep changing, they keep evolving with the needs of the labor market. And I think, and for us, it's compulsory to write in the KPIs the employer satisfaction. We have to do that. And the job placement of students within 6 months, we have to do that. So if you want a job, just look at what they say on the website for people that graduate in your field, and then the answer is easy, where you go.
It really speaks to the nimbleness of colleges.
Yeah.
To react.
One of the things that I absolutely adore about being in our line of business and working with our CWIL community is that many of the institutions coast to coast, college, university, polytechnics, in some ways we find ourselves in a little bit of healthy competition with each other, but in more ways we collaborate and we care about the general success of work integrated learning and students across the Canadian economy. And one of the things that does come up is we have this shared perspective, and we're growing our WIL offerings, and with immense appreciation for the federal funding that's come through the SWIP program as one mechanism to inspire industry. I'm just curious, what else could we be doing to inspire industry, just to make it part of their DNA, to have this cycle and flow of students, so that we can, not only adapt to their needs, but maybe they could also adapt to the needs of the institutions and students as well. Any thoughts on how we manage that?
Matt, maybe I'll be the first to give a quick
Please.
response. Every region in this country and every institution has a unique relationship with its local community, with its incoming students, with its graduating students, and with its local industry. So I don't necessarily know that there are tactics that we can outline that make sense for everybody. I prefer to approach it from a mindset perspective. The educational leaders, the higher education system exists to benefit those communities, to benefit those industry clusters, to benefit the regions. And as educators, if we can continue to focus on our own emotional intelligence and keep activating that empathy and keep thinking about being additive, how we can add value to industry, then I really think that's all that matters, because depending on what the program of study is or what area it is or what industry it supports, if we are open-minded, and it's okay in 2022 to talk about being open-hearted and being a values-centered organization and values-centered leaders, if we were approaching our leadership practices and our educational institutions through that lens, then we are going to be able to create success regardless of where we are and regardless of which industry sector we serve. So it's much more, to me, about how we approach those relationships than specifically identifying the tactics that make sense.
I think, yeah, one of the things that I think is a challenge, and I mean, your group will know this better than anybody, is, how do you keep, to your point, Matt, how do you kind of keep that flow? So that it's one thing to be able to say, okay, so we got some students and get you involved, and here's a program, and to sort of start on that pathway. But we're a country of small businesses, and small businesses don't have an unlimited ability to take more and more and more. So I do think we've got to sort of understand where skills gaps are emerging, and we've got to try, make sure that we're finding the right response to that labor market, because the labor market is shifting, the needs are shifting, and I don't think there's an unlimited ability for the same employers to be taking students from universities and from colleges and from polytechnics, and so we get so that I'd hate to saturate the same employers, which does mean we've got to be able to recognize where is that opportunity, how is that opportunity shifting, and how do we move with the shift? How do we get the employer that we've had a really great relationship with to actually share with their network that there are opportunities to bring in students, and that and to see this as a part of their their whole cycle when it comes to thinking about bringing on the next generation of talent. So it's not without challenges, and it really does rely on those close relationships, which I think we've all talked about. Those close relationships with industry, that's where it starts. And then it's that constant ability to tweak and move and see where the new requirements are, and maybe a co-op program's not the right thing, but a shorter term placement is. And so it's trying to sort of stay on top of that. And I personally, I think that's a place where where this sector has been really successful.
Thank you so much for that. So I checked in with the Q&A button, and it doesn't appear there's any questions from audience, although a lot of comment in support of what we've been discussing. So either A, we asked all the right questions and we're right on spot here, or B, no one's had a chance to put them in because this is so engaging. So with the last few minutes here, just any closing thoughts or comments about maybe the future of work integrated learning, or anything else you'd like to share as we close out our panel? Liz, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on something, or expand on something that Sarah just pointed out. It's really also when we're talking about industry, and we talk about industry is big industry a lot of the times, and we have our favorite industry partners that we are always knocking on the door of, but it's also how we begin to integrate the WIL component with entrepreneurship. And how do we develop entrepreneurship, and how do we work with the smaller entrepreneurs and WIL opportunities with them? And how do we include entrepreneurship with our own students who want to become entrepreneurs in their own industries, right? So I think that's an area that we need to work on more. And I think it's a huge opportunity when we look at WIL.
I think myself, I will only add one thing. We still need to have investment into WIL and at all levels, because especially for the SMEs, you know, many of them had a hard time because of the pandemic, and it will take them years to go back to where they were before. So we need incentives, whether in terms of tax credit or wage subsidies, and we really need to provide more for a group that are at risk. Because we want to increase the diversity, we want to increase, you know, whether it's people with disabilities or other groups. So I think it's very, very important. I love when Sarah said we need to make it, it doesn't make sense when, you know, an employer is bombarded by 5 different institutions. So we need to make it easy for the employer to have access to WIL. And it needs to be, I want to come back, and this was said earlier, I forgot who said it, maybe it was Liz. We need to make sure that it is also part of the DNA of employer, that they take students, because at the end of the day, that's how we would create a relève and succession plan.
Okay, any final comments before we wrap up? Just checking in.
No, you know what, Matt? I saw that there was the question in the Q&A, and I guess I would just say, I try to squeeze in. I think that as much as we've talked about work integrated learning and the real value proposition that has for students, graduates, for employers, I'd like to even see us move that a step further, and it underlines something Denise said earlier about the age limit. I think we need to be starting to talk about learning integrated work, so that we're trying to push that into to a lifelong learning, and really engage employers to be thinking about how are we going to integrate learning into work, and how are we going to come back to institutions over somebody's career, over the lifetime of our business, to ensure that we continue to recognize the value of both ends of that equation.
That felt like a perfect cliffhanger for maybe the theme of another symposium. Thank you, Sarah. Hey, listen, just as we close out this panel, I really want to extend my special thanks to all of our panelists, Denise, Joe, Liz, Sarah. This has been informative, it's been fun, and I just really appreciate you sharing your time. On behalf of all of us here at CWIL, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and talking about WIL, which we all love. Again, thank you.